We'll leave the Ohio clock as senators are finishing up their party caucus lunches momentarily. They should be back in session to continue work on the temporary federal spending bill known as the continuing resolution. Senate floor there will go live now. This is live coverage on C-SPAN 2.
Madam President.
Senator from Maryland.
Madam President, I ask that the call or the quorum be vacated.
We're not in a quorum call.
Oh, can I just proceed?
Yes.
Thank you. Madam President, as the chair of the Appropriations Committee, I rise to oppose the continuing resolution that the House passed last week on a party line vote of 230 to 189. I am so frustrated for all of the people of Maryland and all of the people of the United States that should have a government that they can count on to operate, that they count on a government that works as hard as they do, that they can count on having a government that they pay for. However, what we have here is a manufactured crisis with histrionic, theatrical politics to try to bring us to the brink of a shutdown. It's shutdown, slam down politics. The CR that was sent over to us is loaded with political ideology. What does it do? The first thing it wants to do is defund the President's Affordable Care Act, to take away the health care from those who need it. It also is designed to create a crisis over the debt ceiling and undermine the full faith and credit of the United States of America. Now, our President has been clear. He will veto any bill with these toxic political riders, and he is right, and we will support him. Much will be said in the media over the next several days about something called the continuing resolution. There we go again. Washington speak that nobody in America understands. There we go with budget speak, where they're saying, what are they trying to accomplish? Let me explain it in straight talk way. A continuing resolution is a straightforward, simple act in which we extend the government's funding beyond October 1st to a date certain. It's meant to continue the funding. It is always historically meant to be one, short-term. Number two, a stopgap measure as we work on getting final resolutions of budgetary and fiscal matters. It's also designed to keep the United States government open and functioning while we work out our difficulties. So that's what a continuing resolution is meant to be. It was never meant to be a vehicle for controversial, provocative, poke it in your eye, stick it to you, controversial legislation. It was also never meant to be a negotiating chip for a grander bargain to resolve our issues, nor was it ever designed to be a weapon in the fight over the size and role of government. That's the authorizing committee. That's what we do in our appropriations committees at the subcommittee level. That's what Senator Murray and her budget committee worked on when we passed the budget. That's where those fights come in, not at the end of the fiscal year. It's the same old tricks and techniques year after year since President Obama's been elected. They not only want to throw sand in the gear of the Obama administration, they want to throw cement into the gears of the functioning of government. Well, I think that's outrageous. The House continuing resolution is a manufactured crisis, driving us towards a shutdown. We have plenty of real crises in our country. The crisis of sustained chronic unemployment at 7% or higher in many of my communities, or in certain sectors like construction or the rural parts of my state. It's also a real crisis for those who need health care. It is a real crisis for those who are seeking higher education and can't afford it. And look at our crisis in the foreign policy arena. At the very day the President is speaking at the UN to project American power, the other side is trying to make us powerless to function on the Senate floor. If they want to project American power show that the greatest parliamentary deliberative body in the world can be parliamentary and deliberative and solve our problems. If you want to project power, it starts here, showing that we can govern ourselves. We start by acting right, focusing on solving real problems with real solutions, and getting off of this brinkmanship style. The President said he'll veto it. The riders are veto bait. This is all designed to use up a lot of time and a lot of resources. I was elected to the Senate to be a legislator, not a prop for a political farce. This is not Gilbert and Sullivan. This is the real deal. The American people are fed up with manufactured crises, and so am I. So let me tell you our view about where we want to go. And who's the we? I believe it's not only the Democrats in the Senate. I believe that there are pragmatists on both sides of the aisle that want to find a sensible center that we could achieve fiscal stability, begin to draw down our public debt, but also have an opportunity to be pro-growth in our country, where we focus on important issues of national security, rebuilding America with infrastructure, rebuilding our human infrastructure in terms of our educational system and also our research and development to come up with the new ideas that will lead to the new jobs in the new century. The way we want to do this, and the way I'm suggesting, is that the American people would like us that when we vote, so the other party would like us to have a continuing resolution December 15th. Now, that's one more gimmick to bring us to Christmas Eve, where we have a lot of theatrics and jingle bells, while we try to solve our situation. I want a short-term CR. I would like that between now and November, not a long-term, not something just to dilly or dither. I'm tired of dilly and dither. A short-term CR for sometime around mid-November. And that the purpose of that we would use that opportunity to get to a vote in December that would be on the funding of all of our bills, arrived at by a vote here, a conference committee with the House, where our spending would be sensible, it would be affordable, it would meet compelling human need, the National Security Institute, the national security issues of the United States of America, and rebuild our infrastructure. This isn't hard. But in order to get that, we need to clear out the toxic political items in the CR. So I want a clean CR. A clean CR means getting rid of the political riders of defunding Obamacare and striking the debt limit rider. Second, to have a shorter date. My recommendation would be around November 15th, because a longer-term CR means more autopilot functioning of government, more government dysfunction. November 15th keeps the pressure on both of us, on both sides of the aisle, to get the job done. What is getting the job done? First of all, we would like to cancel sequester. And we would like to cancel sequester in a balanced way. What is sequester? We have to come up with about $110 billion in reducing debt. To do that, we can do that through additional strategic cuts. As an appropriator, I'm willing to look at them. Number two, revenue. What about those loopholes that Mitt Romney talked about? Let's bring some of those back and examine them, and let's look at some of the items in mandatory spending. This is the way that we can enact our bills and invest in our country and protect our country. Our nation faces long-term fiscal challenges. It does demand action from the Congress, but the place for those negotiations is not in a continuing resolution. It belongs in the Budget Committee. And 6 Republican senators who are planning to filibuster this week are the same ones who threatened and blocked the filibuster for the budget that the Senate passed to be able to go to conference in the House. So they blocked the budget. Then they blame us because we don't have a budget. Go figure. The House and Senate Appropriations Committee, the appropriators, have marked up annual funding bills. We're ready to make sure we could go to do our work, but we need the Budget Committee to give us a top line. We can't get to conference because, as I said, Republicans have objected to this. Now, they want to have a simple stopgap thing that leads to a showdown and a shutdown. If we don't come together, we will have very serious consequences. If we do not act a clean continuing resolution by October 1st that enables us to get to a sensible outcome in early December, let me tell you what will happen. And these aren't made-up numbers. The government will shut down. Well, now, doesn't that look great for the United States of America? We say to emerging democracies all over the world, hey, look at us. Hey, look at us. We need to show that we can govern. But it has not only consequences in the way we're viewed in the world, it provides uncertainty for business. It will be terrible for our economy. It will have a direct impact on jobs. Business will not know what the government's going to do, so they don't know what they can do, so they will not be spending to create jobs. So all we're doing is creating more chaos. We want to be sure that small business administrations approve loans. They need to be open to do that. That rural development, housing, and farm loans are able to go out so we can help where that is. We want to make sure that crucial life-saving discoveries at NIH happen. We want right now, if we have a shutdown, the people will not be able to be admitted to the National Institutes of Health clinical trials and programs because they don't know that they will be continued. Weather forecasters will be told that they're not essential service. We are now looking at the impact on federal law enforcement. I could go item by item. I will talk more about those items as time goes on. But let me conclude by saying this. During this last year, on both sides of the aisle, the Appropriations Committee has functioned well. I would like to thank both my Democrats, my subcommittee chairman, I see Senator Durbin, who chairs the Defense Committee, but I'd also like to thank the Republicans. My vice chairman of the committee, Senator Shelby of Alabama, helped me move, supported me at every step on the process. We functioned with civility, intellectual rigor, open amendments during the committee process. It was transparent. We had yes votes, we had no votes, but everybody had their day and everybody had their say. We were able to move our process forward, though we disagreed sometimes on the funding level for this or the funding level for that, but we came to a conclusion. I really want to thank them for their cooperation in the process. Now we are here where we could take the next step. Yes, we have to debate some of those line items. We do need to debate some of those programs, but we can't move forward unless we resolve the shutdown showdown. So let's pass a continuing resolution that takes us to mid-November. Let's make that continuing resolution a clean CR, which means let's get rid of the political riders. With our goal in December is that we pass an omnibus bill that is affordable, sensible, meets compelling human needs, national security needs, our human infrastructure, and also lays the groundwork for new jobs by funding research and development. And at the same time, to cancel sequester because we've arrived at it in, again, a balanced way where, yes, we can make additional strategic cuts, where we can also, though, need to look at some of the items in mandatory spending, and yes, let's also look at some revenue. I think we can do it. And if we want to project American power, the way to do that is right now, show that we can govern. Let's not get ourselves into a box where we're heading to a showdown. Let's not get ourselves in a situation where we end up with a shutdown, because this will not be a way that builds confidence, builds our economy, and makes America continue to be as strong as we can. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, my understanding under the unanimous consent that the Senator from Texas is to be recognized, but I would ask if he would allow me 5 minutes to follow the Senator from Maryland, and then I yield the floor to him. I thank the Senator from Texas. Madam President, I want to stand in support of the statement made by the Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. We have served together in the House, now in the Senate. I am happy to serve with her in capacity as Chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, the largest in dollar amount that has this responsibility. And I think what she has spelled out on the floor is very straightforward and very honest. We were challenged here in the Senate to come up with a budget resolution this year. And many of our critics said, you've come up with excuses, now come up with a budget resolution. And we did. And we did. 6 months ago, we passed a budget resolution. And then we asked for consent to go to a conference committee with the House to work out our differences. Time and time again, senators on the other side of the aisle objected to our meeting with the House to work out our differences. Oh, they had a different reason every day. The net result was we couldn't have the conference committee to reach an agreement with the House on how much we'd spend on budgets. And then Senator Mikulski told each of us in our Appropriations Subcommittee, do your work. Sit down with your Republican member and come up with a spending bill for next year that is sensible, that gets rid of sequestration, that is sensible. And we did. Time and again, we worked these out on a bipartisan basis, brought them through committee, ready for floor action. The first bill came to the floor, transportation, if I'm not mistaken. Senator Patty Murray brought it to the floor. We wanted to bring this first spending bill to the floor. Let's debate it. Let's get it done. And the Republicans objected to considering this appropriation bill on the floor. So they objected to a conference committee on a budget. They objected to the spending bills. And here we are at the 11th hour, approaching October 1st without the money to continue the functions of government. And now we are facing a slowdown this week. And we are going to begin what may not technically be a filibuster, but at least is a delay in meeting our responsibility to fund our government. Some have said, the House Republicans and others, if you do not stop President Obama's Health Care Reform Act, we'll shut down the government. That isn't fair. As Senator Mikulski has said, there are people across America counting on the functions of our government. And this notion that we're somehow going to shut down the government with this political threat is unacceptable. Unacceptable to the American people and unacceptable to this great institution. Senator Mikulski is correct. We ought to have a short-term CR so that we can get down, roll up our sleeves, and finally finish this business. Whether you're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, people are fed up with this do-nothing Congress that doesn't address the real issues American families are facing across our nation. We need to really roll up our sleeves and get it done. To have long speeches that go on for hours, delaying this funding of our government jeopardizes the most basic functions of what we need to achieve right here. We need to come together on a bipartisan basis. A filibuster, a delay, long speeches may get the attention of the media for a few minutes, but it won't solve America's problems. The last point I want to make was her strongest point. The President is at the United Nations this week, meeting with leaders around the world to try to bring a more peaceful world in a very dangerous climate in many places. He wants to let people know that America will use its leadership and its power to come together to make this a better world. And what message is coming out of the United States Senate? That we are divided, we're fighting with one another, we're facing filibusters, and on and on. This isn't what America should be projecting. Let's project the kind of unity and the kind of determination that has made this a great nation. Let's fund our government. Let's solve our problems. Let's stop the obstruction. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Texas.
Madam President, I rise today in opposition to Obamacare. I rise today in an effort to speak for 26 million Texans and for 300 million Americans. All across this country, Americans are suffering because of Obamacare. Obamacare isn't working. And yet, fundamentally, there are politicians in this body who are not listening to the people. They're not listening to the concerns of their constituents. They're not listening to the jobs lost, to the people forced into part-time work, to the people losing their health insurance, to the people who are struggling. A great many Texans, a great many Americans feel that they don't have a voice. And so I hope to play some very small part in helping provide that voice for them. Madam President, I intend to speak in opposition to Obamacare. I intend to speak in support of defunding Obamacare until I am no longer able to stand. To do everything that I can to help Americans stand together and recognize this grand experiment 3.5 years ago is quite simply not working. I want to also say at the outset that I am particularly honored to be standing side by side with my friend and colleague, Senator Mike Lee from Utah. Senator Lee has shown visionary leadership in standing up and taking the mantle of leading the effort to defund Obamacare and to challenge this train wreck of a law. And Senator Lee has been repaid at times with vilification from official Washington. And I will tell you, Madam President, in my judgment, there is no senator in this body, Republican or Democrat, who is more principled, who is more dedicated, who is more fearless and willing to fight for the principles that make this nation great than is Senator Mike Lee. And it is a singular privilege to serve with him and to stand side by side with him and so many others in this body, and even more importantly, so many millions of Americans all across this country. There is a problem in Washington, and the problem is bigger than a continuing resolution. It's bigger than Obamacare. It's even bigger than the budget. The most fundamental problem, the frustration, is that the men and women in Washington aren't listening. If you talk to the man and woman on the street, that's the message you hear over and over again. Why don't they listen to me? Why don't they hear what we have to say? They aren't listening to the millions of people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians across the spectrum, who say our elected officials, they get to Washington and they stop listening to the people. We just had a six-week recess during August, where a substantial percentage of members of Congress chose not to hold town halls during the 6 weeks we had to be back in our home states, not even to give the constituents a chance to say their views. Because it's very easy when those of us who are in elected office have been here for a long time to believe Washington knows better, to believe that all the solutions are found in Washington, D.C., and the rest of the country is better, as they say of small children, neither seen but not heard. We need millions of people to get an answer. Millions of people are asking for accountability, for responsibility, for truth from their elected officials, truth about how Obamacare is failing the men and women of America. It is time, Madam President, quite simply, to make D.C. listen. And Madam President, that is a point I intend to make over and over again, because it is fundamentally what we are trying to do. We are trying to gather the American people to make D.C. listen. The whole debate we're having here today is not over strategy. It's not about process. It's not about procedure. Now, if you read the papers, it looks like it is. If you read the papers, it's all sorts of confusing cloture on the motion to the what, the to the which, that anyone outside of Washington, D.C., immediately their eyes glaze over. Even a lot of people in Washington, D.C., their eyes glaze over. And this is also not about pollsters. It's not about pundits or consultants or those who are making money back and forth on the political process. They have always been with us, and, Madam President, I am confident they will remain with us for all time. The problem is D.C. isn't listening. The problem is our elected leaders are not listening to their constituents. Everyone in America understands that Obamacare is destroying jobs, is driving up health care costs, is killing health benefits, is shattering the economy all across the country in all 50 states. It doesn't matter what state you go to. You can go to any state in the Union. It doesn't matter if you're talking to Republicans or Democrats or independents or libertarians. Americans understand this thing isn't working, and yet Washington is pretending not to know. Washington is pretending to have no awareness. Instead, you have politicians that give speeches about how wonderful Obamacare is. And yet, at the same time, they go to the president and ask for an exemption from Obamacare for members of Congress. If Obamacare is so wonderful, why is it that its loudest advocates don't want to be subject to it? I'll confess, Madam President, that's a very difficult one to figure out. D.C. is using a rigged process to keep Obamacare funded, to keep this job-killing bill funded. And what they want to do fundamentally is ignore the men and women of America and keep up with business as usual. You know, people wonder, why does Congress have such low approval ratings? Madam President, I remember when all of us, all 100 of us, were in the historic Senate chamber for a bipartisan meeting, and multiple senators stood up and expressed frustration with the low approval ratings that Congress have. It varies sometimes 10, 12, 14%, but it's always abysmal. And some suggested the reason was that we're not legislating enough. We just need to pass some more laws, by golly, and the American people will be happier. You know, I have to admit, that doesn't comport with just about anything I've ever heard in the state of Texas. That doesn't comport with anything I've ever heard from constituents. I'm going to suggest the most fundamental reason why Congress remains in the low teens in approval rating. Because Congress is not listening to the American people. You know, every poll that's been done for years now, when you ask the American people, what is your top priority? The answer is consistently jobs and the economy. Over and over again, jobs and the economy. And again, that's national. That is in your state, my state. That is in all 50 states. Jobs and the economy is the answer you get. And it's also not partisan. You can ask Republicans, you can ask Democrats, you can ask independents. And they say, we need jobs, we need economic growth back. And yet I will tell you, Madam President, you and I have both served in this institution some 9 months, not very long. But in the time we have been here, we have spent virtually zero time even talking about jobs and the economy. It doesn't make the agenda. It apparently is not important enough for this body's time. We spent 6 weeks talking about guns, talking about taking away law-abiding citizens' Second Amendment rights. And we spend virtually no time talking about fundamental tax reform, about regulatory reform, about getting the economy going. And politicians wonder, why is it that Congress is held in such low esteem? Well, when Congress, and this is unfortunately a bipartisan issue on both sides, we need to do a better job of listening to the people. If the top priority of the American people is jobs and the economy, Madam President, I'm going to suggest to you the top priority of Congress should be jobs and the economy. You and I should be both scratching our heads trying to think of a time we weren't talking about jobs and the economy, because I tell you, we certainly haven't gotten it taken care of yet. The American people are frustrated because their elected officials don't listen. When we're home on the campaign trail, we say we listen. And yet something about this Senate floor, something about Washington, D.C., I don't know if it's the water, something in the air, the cherry blossoms, but people get here and they stop listening to the American people. You know, throughout the state of Texas as I travel, and I spent the month of August and the beginning of September traveling virtually every day on the road throughout Texas and across the country, listening, hearing the stories. The American people are hurting. This is a difficult time. Look, the very rich, they're doing fine. In fact, they're doing better under President Obama than they were before. But hardworking American families are struggling, and their life has become harder and harder and harder. And, Madam President, Obamacare is the biggest job killer in this country. The American people want to stop this madness. And so do I. Here in Washington, we pass million-dollar bills, billion-dollar bills no one's ever read, often without even voting on them. We call it unanimous consent. It's only unanimous because they don't let anyone know. Here in Washington, we spend $2 trillion more than last year, and then tell voters we saved money. The system is deliberately designed to hide what we're really doing. In this debate right now over Obamacare and the continuing resolution, voting to pass bills called procedure, as if it doesn't matter. We pretend it doesn't matter. It does matter. Our leaders right now demand approval for bills before they're amended. Everyone come to the floor, vote for the bill. Then we'll amend it to make it say the opposite of what it says right now. But you've already voted, so don't worry about it. We're told to agree to the bills without even knowing what the final product will be. And that is what's happening right now. Our leaders in both parties are asking us to support a bill, to cut off debate on a bill, without even knowing what's in it. It is, as the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, once observed, quote, pass it to find out what's in it. That's how Washington does business. Let me tell you how this is likely to unfold. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid has said he intends to offer an amendment to determine the future of our health care system. And based on the public press reports, and I would note you have to rely on the public press reports because this body doesn't know, but based on the public press reports, that amendment is going to fully fund Obamacare, is going to strip the language the House of Representatives passed to defund Obamacare to listen to the American people. The central vote that the Senate will take on this fight will not occur today, and it will not occur tomorrow. First vote we're going to take on this is a vote on what's called cloture on the motion to proceed. Very few people not on this floor have any idea what that means, and even, I suspect, a fair number of people on this floor are not quite sure what that means. That will simply be a vote whether to take up this bill and to begin debating this bill, and I expect that vote to pass overwhelmingly, if not unanimously. Everyone agrees we ought to take this up. We ought to start this conversation. The next vote we take will occur on Friday or Saturday, and it will be what is called cloture on the bill. Madam President, that is the vote that matters. Cloture on the bill, the vote Friday or Saturday, is the vote that matters. Why is that? Because that vote is subject to a 60-vote threshold. If Republicans vote with Democrats, then this body will cut off debate on the bill. Cloture is simply cutting off debate. It is saying we're not going to talk about it anymore. We are silencing the voices of the Senate. We are silencing the voice of the people, and we are cutting off debate. Now, why does that matter? Because once you invoke cloture, the rules of the Senate allow the majority leader to introduce the amendment to fund Obamacare and then to have it pass with just 51 votes. Not 60, 51. Now, Madam President, as you are well aware, there are more than 51 Democrats in this body. Post-cloture, after this body has voted to cut off debate, the Democrats can vote on a straight party line vote to fund Obamacare. And, Madam President, I'm going to let you in on a dirty little secret. When that happens, every Republican, if we get to that point, will vote against it. And every Republican will then go home to his or her states and say, look, I voted against Obamacare. That's actually the preferred outcome. To have a vote, but yet to have the result be business as usual continues in Washington. You know, it's a little bit like the World Wrestling Federation. It's wrestling matches where it's all rigged. The outcome is predetermined. They know in advance who's going to win and lose, and it's all for show. You know, there's some members of this body that if we could have 100 show votes saying, here's what we're for, but mind you, none of them are actually going to change the law. None of them are actually going to occur. None of them are going to make one iota of difference to the American people because they'll never become law. But we'll get to vote over and over again on proving how committed we are to principle A, B, C, D, or E. That, curiously, would make a significant number of senators happy. Madam President, our constituents deserve more. No more fake fights. No more hiding your votes. No more games. No more trying to fool the American people. We need to make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen. I want to stand and fight for the more than 1.6 million Americans who've signed a national petition against Obamacare. And to the millions more who didn't because they were told by a politician, it's not possible. Don't even try to fight because it's not possible. You know, I'm reminded of a children's story. My wife Heidi and I are blessed to have two little girls, Caroline and Catherine, age 5 and 2. And one of my favorite children's stories, actually from when I was a kid, was The Little Engine That Could. The little engine that could, the train going up that said over and over again, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. You know, I have to say, if you listen to a lot of members of this body, the message would be simple, that little engine can't. What they'd say to that train when it started at the bottom of the hill is, no, you can't. I think I can. I think, no, you can't. No, you can't. We can't win. We can't stop Obama. It cannot be done. It is impossible, except that there's nothing we can do. Are millions of Americans out of work? Yes. Are millions of Americans struggling? Yes. Are millions of Americans seeing their health insurance premiums skyrocket? Yes. Are millions of Americans at risk of losing their health insurance because of Obamacare? Yes. But Washington tells our constituents, no, no, never mind. Can't be done. Cannot be done. It is impossible. The rules of Washington say this cannot be done. And you wonder why this body has such low approval among the people. When we go out and tell the American people it can't be done, there's nothing that can be done to stop Obamacare, what we're saying really is we're not willing to do it. We're not willing to stand up and fight. We're willing to give speeches. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. If we want to have a speech contest, we can line up and fall over backwards. Who can give the best speech against Obamacare? But when it comes to actually standing and fighting, when it comes to actually to listen to the American people, and an awful lot of members of this body, at least so far, have not shown up to battle. You know, there are a lot of folks in the Washington establishment who don't want to hear from us. The chattering class is quick to discipline anyone who refuses to blindly fall in line. That's the way Washington plays. There are rules. You are not supposed to speak for the people. There's a way things are done in Washington. And make no mistake, D.C. depends upon Americans not paying attention. They know that most Americans are quite reasonably working too hard to provide for their family. They're too busy spending time with their friends and their family. They're too busy working to try to make sure their family is provided for. They're going to church. They're dealing with the day-to-day burdens of life. And you know what they've learned? The American people have learned that you know, when we get involved, even then it seems like Washington politicians rarely listen. Madam President, I believe that can change. Madam President, I am standing here today to salute, to celebrate the American democratic system. I am standing here today to suggest that if senators listen to their constituents, if we listen to the American people, the vote would be 100-0 to defund Obamacare, even those senators who voted for it, who might have believed it would work. Now, Madam President, many of us would have disagreed. Had I been here, unsurprisingly, I would have voted against Obamacare 3.5 years ago. A number of members of this body voted in favor of it. But regardless of how you voted 3.5 years ago, one of the great virtues of life is learning, is looking at the evidence, looking at the facts, and seeing when something isn't working. You know, you look at the labor unions. 3.5 years ago, the labor unions were enthusiastically supporting Obamacare. Why? Because they heard the promises. They heard that it was going to work, it was going to give health care, it was going to be a bonanza for all. And they believed the promises, and that's understandable. And yet one of the things we've seen this year is one labor union after another saying, whoa, this thing isn't working. This thing is hurting us. This thing is hurting our members. And by the way, the people who it's hurting are hardworking men and women, hardworking American families. They're the ones getting hammered. And to see one labor union after another, when you see James Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters, saying Obamacare is destroying the 40-hour work week that is the backbone of the American middle class. Now, Madam President, that's not me saying that. That's not a Republican politician saying that. That's not even any politician from Washington. That is the Teamsters. So, Madam President, I would ask you, submit the question to the American people. Do the American people want to destroy the 40-hour work week that is the backbone of the American middle class? I'm going to suggest to you that's not a close question. That's not, you know, people talk about how we're a 50-50 nation, how there's a tight partisan divide. I don't believe it. I actually think on questions like that, there's an overwhelming majority of Americans who say, of course not. Of course we shouldn't destroy the 40-hour work week. Of course we shouldn't break the backbone of the American middle class. And if more politicians just listen to the people, we would respond and avert this train wreck. And yet, Mr. President, the politicians of Washington tell us, don't worry about it. Obamacare is just going to be peachy keen. The Senate is too busy to do anything to avert this train wreck. Now, mind you, the Senate's not too busy to exempt ourselves from it. We know enough to say, we don't want to be a part of this thing. But the American people know it can't be done. Can't be done. Nothing to be done. You just need to accept. You know, Mr. President, Americans have never been people who accept failure. Americans have never been people who accept impossibility. If you look to a ragtag bunch of colonialists in the 18th century, the idea that we would stand up to Great Britain, the British Army, the most mighty military force on the face of the planet, it was impossible. Can't be done. I guarantee you, all of the pundits that we see going on TV and intoning in deep baritone voices, this cannot be done. If we were back in the 18th century, they would be going on, I don't know, maybe pigeon carrier or something, sending messages written somehow in dark ink, this cannot be done. You can't stand up to the British Army, can't be done, it's impossible. Accept your subjugation, accept your taxation without representation, accept that this is impossible. You know, if you fast forward to the Civil War, time of enormous pain, anguish, bloodshed in the United States, there were a lot of voices then who said the Union cannot be saved. Can't be done, accept defeat. I suspect those same pundits, had they been around in the mid-19th century, they would have written those same columns, this cannot be done. If you go to the 1940s, Nazi Germany, look, we saw in Britain Neville Chamberlain, who told the British people, accept the Nazis. Yes, they'll dominate the continent of Europe, but that's not our problem. Let's appease them. Why? Because it can't be done. We can't possibly stand against them. And in America, there were voices that listened to that. I suspect those same pundits who say it can't be done, if it had been in the 1940s, we would have been listening to them. Then they would have made television. They would have gotten beyond carrier pigeons and beyond letters, and they would have been on TV, and they would have been saying, you cannot defeat the Germans. You go to the late 1960s, when a president, John F. Kennedy, told this country, we're going to send a man to the moon. You know, with John F. Kennedy told this country we're going to send a man to the moon, there were a lot of people who said it can't be done. It's impossible. Cannot be done. And yet John F. Kennedy had the vision to say Americans can do things whatever we set our mind to. You go to the late 1970s, the 1980s. Midst of the Cold War, I remember growing up in the Cold War. I remember being told the Soviet Union can't be defeated. Can't be done. We got to accept malaise. We got to accept second-class citizenship. We got to accept, you know, they got a lot of weapons. We can't possibly stand up to the Soviet Union. And there was a president whom I admire deeply, President Ronald Reagan, who had the temerity to say, what's your strategy on the Cold War? Answer, we win, they lose. Now, at the time, those same Washington fonts of wisdom said it can't be done. No, you can't win. Winning is it's a two-dimensional strategy. You need to be much more nuanced than that. You need to push for détente, whatever that means. You need to push for something short of actually winning. So we get to Obamacare. And what do all of those voices say? Can't be stopped. Can't be done. Cannot defund it. Now, Mr. President, by any measure, Obamacare is a far less intimidating foe than those that I have discussed, with the possible exception of the moon. The moon might be as intimidating as Obamacare. And yet those same voices of Washington give the same message that they've said over and over and over again. Just the opposite of the message of that little engine that could. No, you can't. It can't be done. No, we can't. So what should we have instead? And you know what? You hear echoes from these past battles. Well, we ought to have a vote. We ought to have a vote that we can go to our constituents and say, by golly, we really, really, really dislike Obamacare. Can we add a couple more reallys? I want to make clear it's really, really, really. And we wonder why our constituents look at us and say, what on earth are you doing? What on earth are you doing? Do you actually care that we're losing our jobs? Do you actually care that we can't find a job? Do you care that our small businesses aren't growing? Do you care that health insurance premiums for people who are struggling are skyrocketing? Do you care that more and more Americans are losing their health insurance? We don't need fake fights. We don't need fake votes. We need real change. We need a better economy. We need more jobs. We need more freedom. And critical to doing that is stopping Obamacare. Because Americans shouldn't have to worry about what Washington is doing to them, what Washington is doing to make their life harder, what Washington is doing to take away their job, what Washington is doing to drive up their health insurance premiums, what Washington is doing to jeopardize the health insurance you have now. Mr. President, I cannot tell you how many times across the state of Texas I've had men and women come up to me, some with disabilities, some in wheelchairs, say to me, please stop this bill, stop Obamacare, because I don't want to lose my health insurance. It's jeopardizing the health insurance coverage that I've got now. Mr. President, we all remember when President Obama told the American people, if you like your health insurance, you can keep it. Now, at the time, that sounded really good. Look, any of us who liked our health insurance wanted to keep it. So we liked that promise. That's the kind of promise we liked from our candidates, our office holders. And yet, as I mentioned earlier, one of the great faculties of higher reason is the ability to learn from evidence and facts. And we have learned that that promise did not, in fact, meet reality. Because the reality is that millions of Americans are at risk of losing their health insurance. Just a few weeks ago, UPS sent a letter to 15,000 employees saying we are terminating spousal health insurance because of Obamacare. 15,000 employees, their husbands and wives, told, sorry, your health insurance is gone. Now remember, the promise was if you like your health insurance, you can keep it. You know, for those 15,000 UPS employees, for their husbands and wives, that promise has been disproved by reality. This body would step up and stop Obamacare if we did one thing, just one thing, if we listened to our constituents. And so that's together what we have to do, is make D.C. listen. You know, a lot of folks in Washington are angry we're even having this fight. A lot of folks in Washington are angry. You know, it is fascinating how many politicians in Washington think this isn't even worth our time. Mr. President, I will point out, as is usually the case, almost always the case, the Senate floor is largely empty. Everyone's schedules are apparently busy enough that standing up, coming together to stop Obamacare doesn't make it onto the priority list. We ought to have all 100 senators on this floor around the clock until we come together and stop Obamacare. If you talk to our constituents, that's what they would like. If you talk to our constituents would say, what possibly do you have to do that is more important than getting the economy moving again, than bringing back jobs? What possibly do you have to do that is more important than stopping me from losing my health insurance, stopping me from losing my health care? That's what I hear from my constituents over and over again. And Mr. President, I'm confident you hear it from your constituents, and every one of us hears it from our constituents, because that's what Americans are saying in all 50 states. We shouldn't have to worry about what the next rule, the next regulation, the next tax is that's going to be handed down from the D.C. ruling class. You know, Obamacare alone has produced over 20,000 pages of regulation. Now, Mr. President, I'm confident that you have not read 20,000 pages of Obamacare regulations. I can tell you I haven't read 20,000 pages of Obamacare regulations, and I would wager all the money in my bank account that there is no member of this body who has read 20,000 pages of Obamacare regulation. And yet, Mr. President, what is Washington telling small businesses all across the country? You're bound by 20,000 pages of Obamacare regulation. And more is coming. Another 3,000 pages every 6 months. So it's going to keep coming and coming and coming. You know, I remember doing a teletown hall several months ago, and a woman who owns a small business, she asked a question. How do I comply with all these regulations? How do I comply with the burdens of Obamacare? And it was really quite striking. She said, I don't even know where to start. And I'll confess, I felt embarrassed. Because I said, ma'am, I don't know how to tell you that. The complexity is so much. What it's causing more and more small businesses to do is just stay small. Just avoid Obamacare altogether, because they can't decipher the rules and regulations. So they know if they don't have 50 employees, they can get out from under it. I cannot tell you how many small businesses are not hiring right now. Because if they're at 30 or 40 employees, they're not subject to Obamacare. But if they get that 50th employee, that 50th employee better be one heck of an employee. Because the instant he or she shows up on the payroll, boom, the entire business is subject to 20,000 pages of regulations and crushing costs. So, Mr. President, to the men and women at home today who are out of a job, I point out to you that if it weren't for Obamacare, every small business that has an opportunity to expand right now and that isn't expanding because of Obamacare, that's a job you're not able to get. You want to know why the job economy is so bad, why there's so few jobs, why we've got the lowest workforce participation in decades in the United States? Well, small businesses generate 2/3 of all new jobs in the economy. And small businesses have been hammered under Obamacare unlike ever before. If we listened to our constituents, we would step forward and act to avert this train wreck. The only way that will happen is if the American people demand it. If together we make D.C. listen. That's what this fight is about. It is about ensuring that the American people have a voice. Ensuring that those who are struggling, those who are without a job, those who are afraid of losing their health insurance, that Washington listens to them, that Washington acts on their needs. Mr. President, anyone who wants to know why this body is held in low esteem only has to look out to the empty chairs. If you're out of a job, wondering what the Senate is doing to get our economy moving, to help small businesses create new jobs so you can go to work and provide for your family, the answer is displayed right in front of you. If you're concerned about the health care of yourself, of your family, if you're seeing more and more people losing their health insurance and you're afraid, what about my family? What if I lose my health insurance because of Obamacare? And you ask, what is the United States Senate doing to listen to you? The answer, right now, is an empty chamber. Mr. President, our system was based on a profound notion that sovereignty resides with the American people. That every one of us, you know, sometimes people in the Senate behave as if they have no bosses, as if they're autonomous rulers. And Washington is a little bit of a town where it treats the people in Washington, they behave like kings and queens of their own fiefdoms. And yet, Mr. President, every one of us has a whole lot of bosses. In my instance, I've got 26 million bosses back home in Texas, who are the 26 million Texans whom I work to represent, those who supported me and those who didn't. It's my job to represent every one of them, to fight for every one of them. And the most fundamental problem, bigger than Obamacare, is the problem that Washington has stopped listening to the American people. You know, it is quite striking, Mr. President, that in discussions about Obamacare among elected officials, you hear more complaints about, I don't like all the phone calls I'm getting from my constituents than you do about Obamacare. It is apparently an imposition on some members of this body for their constituents to pick up the phone and express their views. It's viewed as somehow illegitimate. How dare they? Apparently, standing on those steps and taking the oath of office invests 100 people with somehow greater wisdom, greater insight, more brain cells. And our constituents, I get that there's a tendency in this town, particularly as time goes on, to view your constituents as an annoyance. You know, today, just today, I've heard multiple senators complaining, too many phone calls from my constituents. What a remarkable complaint. What a remarkable complaint. You know, Mr. President, you and I have both worked in the private sector. The private sector, if your boss picks up the phone and calls, I suspect neither you or I sat on our computer playing solitaire when our boss picked up the phone and called. Neither one of us said, you know, boss, I'm too busy. Boss, I don't want to listen to it. You may have some priorities for the business, but not me. I know better than you. None of us did that because in the private sector, there's a quick and immediate response. You tell your boss in the private sector, hey, boss, my time's too important for you. I don't care about your priorities. I'm not going to listen to you. And I suspect that will be your last day at that place of employment. Why is Washington broken? Because you've got 100 people, a significant number of whom, on a daily basis, tell their boss, tell their constituents, I'm too busy for you. Don't even bother to call my office because it just, you know what, it ties up my staff. It's annoying. I know better than you do. I know the priorities better than you do. What a broken system, Mr. President. What a broken system. We work for the people, and why are the people unhappy with Washington? Why are they disgusted with Washington? Because Washington isn't listening to them. You know, there's a game instead that's focused on maintaining the status quo. Staying in office, that's what's important because, Mr. President, it is apparently very, very important to be invited to all the right cocktail parties in town. Now, I'll confess I don't go to a whole lot of cocktail parties in town. I'm pretty sure you don't either. But there are members of this body for whom that is really, really important. You know, at the end of the day, we don't work for those holding cocktail parties in Washington, D.C. We don't work for the intelligentsia in the big cities who write newspaper editorials. We work for the American people. We work for single moms. We work for young people. We work for seniors who are struggling. We work for Hispanics, for African Americans. We work for every American who believes in the American dream. And this body isn't listening to the people. Indeed, the very fact that over 1.6 million Americans have signed a petition, have picked up the phone, have been calling offices in this great chamber, is viewed as an inappropriate imposition. Mr. President, what an indictment of this body. That we think it is somehow illegitimate that the American people would ask us not to focus on irrelevant priorities. It's not like the American people are calling saying, you know, focus on some parochial issue. By the way, are the phone calls are not coming from our district saying, Senator, please take more of the American people's tax money and send it back to our district. We'd like some more pork. Those aren't the calls. Those aren't the calls we're getting. The calls are people who are saying, listen, jobs in the economy is my #1 priority. Why isn't it Congress's? Jobs in the economy matter. Why? Because if you're working in a good job, you're providing for your family. Makes it easier for families to stay together, moms and dads. Makes it easier for them to raise their kids, raise them with good values. Makes it easier for them to provide good education for their kids. And when you have one job, it lets you begin to climb the economic ladder to a better job and a better job and a better job. That is the American spirit. And yet we have tens of millions of people in this country out of work. Every month we get the reports from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that says even more people have given up looking for work. Now, the odd way our unemployment statistics work, that makes unemployment, the number the newspapers report, go down. Because when a few 100,000 people say, all right, I give up, it's so hopeless, I'll never find a job. That curiously results in unemployment going down because unemployment, the number that gets reported in the papers, is a measure of a percentage of how many of the people looking for work are unable to find it. I'm going to suggest to you that people giving up, that's even worse. What a sad testament, given the American spirit that we can do anything we set our minds to, that anyone, you know, the great blessings of this nation, Mr. President, have been fundamentally that it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter who your daddy was, Doesn't matter whether you were born into great wealth and privilege and advantage or whether you were born into humble means. Anyone in this country can achieve anything based on hard work, perseverance, and based on the content of your character. What a tremendous, unique blessing that is in the United States of America. And, Mr. President, the reason this Obamacare fight matters so much is that is imperiled right now. In order for anyone with nothing to achieve anything, they have to be able to get a job to start. They have to get onto the first rung of the economic ladder to have a chance at getting to the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth. You know, just a week ago, the Wall Street Journal had a long article about the lost generation. About young people coming out of school in the last few years who haven't gotten their first job, or they've gotten a part-time job. Because of Obamacare, their employer doesn't want to hire them 40 hours a week, so they get hired for 29 hours a week. And you think about young people, if you don't get that first job, you're not going to get the second. You're not going to get the third, and the impact for young people right now that Obamacare is having is absolutely devastating. And what this Wall Street Journal article was saying is that the economic data show that impact will be with them their entire lives. That when they start off their career not gaining skills, not working, not climbing the economic ladder, that delay will stick with them forever. What a travesty. Mr. President, where's the outrage? Where is the outrage? Where are the senators standing here saying, what a travesty that young people are being denied a fair shot in the American dream because of what we have wrought, because of Obamacare? That should unite all of us. That, if we were listening to the American people, that would be where our attention would lie. And so fundamentally, what this week is about is we need to make D.C. listen. Make them listen to the single mom working at a diner, struggling to feed her kids, who's just been told she's being reduced to 29 hours a week. Who's speaking for that single mom right now? Mr. President, who's talking about how Obamacare is forcing more and more people into part-time employment? And by the way, she doesn't get health insurance. Instead, forced into 29 hours a week, what does that single mom do? She gets a second job. So now she's working 2 jobs with 29 hours a week for both of them. Now she's away from her kids even more. She doesn't have health insurance at either job now. But she's got to travel from one to the other. She's got to deal with 2 conflicting schedules because one job wants her to work Tuesday, another job wants her to work that same time on Tuesday. She's got to go to both of her bosses. Both of them said, you need to be there Tuesday afternoon. Who is speaking for that single mom right now? Mr. President, on Friday or Saturday of this week, we will vote on cloture. Anyone who votes yes for cloture, anyone who votes to cut off debate on this bill, is voting to allow Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to fully fund Obamacare. That's a vote that I think is a profound mistake. It's a vote that I hope all 46 Republicans will stand united against. It's a vote in time that I hope that more than a few Democrats will stand against. Mr. President, to fix the problems in this country, this doesn't have to be a partisan issue. Many of the President's most vocal supporters have started coming out against Obamacare. Why? Because the facts show it's not working. Because if you get beyond the team mentality in Washington, if you get beyond the partisan focus in Washington and you ask, is this thing good for the American people, it is very hard on the merits to make the case that it is. It is very, very hard. You know, it's quite interesting. In the course of this debate, there have been more than a few newspaper articles, more than a few attacks from our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle and also from our friends on the Republican side of the aisle. I told my wife I now pick up the newspapers each day to learn just what a scoundrel I am and just what attack will have come, some on the record and some, actually, the ones that are often even better are the anonymous ones. I have to say there is no courage like the courage in Washington of the anonymous congressional staffer. I've chuckled at more than a few of them. But, you know, it says something, Mr. President, that members of this body, that congressional staffers, that members of the media want to make this about personalities. They want to make this about a battle of this senator versus that senator, this person versus that person. So it's all personal. It's like reading the Hollywood gossip pages. That's how this issue is covered. And it's not by accident. Because one of the ways Washington is discovered for not listening to the people is distract the voters with smoke and mirrors. Mr. President, this fight is not about any member of this body. This fight is not about personalities. Look, most Americans could not give a flying flip about a bunch of politicians in Washington. Who cares? You know, almost all of us are in cheap suits with bad haircuts. Who cares? What the American people care about is their own lives. What the American people care about is giving their kids a better future. What the American people care about is having a job with a future. Not a job where they're working 29 hours a week, where they're punching a clock, where they feel like they're just going through the motion, but a job where they say, hey, I've got a career. I can see the next step. I can see the future for my family. That's what the American people care about. And so, Mr. President, regardless of the rocks that will be thrown, and they will continue to be thrown, I have no intention of engaging in that game. No intention of speaking ill of any senator, Republican or Democrat. Because it's not about us. And anyone who is trying to make this a battle of personalities is trying to change the topic from the topic that should matter. Whether or not Obamacare is helping the American people. Mr. President, if you focus on the substance, the evidence is overwhelming. This law is a train wreck. And every day, the headlines come in. More jobs lost, more people losing their health insurance, more premiums going up, more people pushed into part-time work. And yet every day, Mr. President, the United States Senate goes about its business and says, we're too busy to listen to the American people. Now, there are different games, to be sure, that go on both sides of the aisle. Many of our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle right now endeavor to convince the American people, pay no attention to your lying eyes. Obamacare really is a terrific thing. That's not going terribly well. But on the Republican side of the aisle, there's a lot of energy and attention focused on saying, well, yes, Obamacare's terrible, but under no circumstances could we ever do anything about it. That's beyond us. We are destined to lose, and so what we're interested, many on the Republican side of the aisle, is let us cast a show vote. 2, 3, 10, as many votes as possible to say Obamacare is really bad. But we can't fix it. You know, that problem, it crosses that middle aisle. Whether you're telling your constituents it's really working out well despite the objective facts to the contrary, or whether you're telling your constituents, I agree it's a terrible thing, but I can't do anything to fix it. In both cases, you're not listening to the people. That is something we need to correct, Mr. President. All of us, all 100 of us, need to listen to the people. Mr. President, together, we need to make D.C. listen. If we don't, the frustration will grow. If we don't, the dissolution with Washington will grow. If we don't, the approval rating of Congress will keep going down, keep going down, keep going down. The only way to fix this problem is to demonstrate that we understand the facts, that we're not driven by partisan ideology, that we're driven by doing our jobs, listening to the American people. And, Mr. President, it is my fervent hope that over the course of this week, over the course of this debate, that all 46 senators on the Republican side will unite, and that more and